Hey, good morning. I am joining you from a cell phone, so hopefully you can hear me well, because for whatever reason, I'm in the office today and my laptop has decided not to work. So I apologize for that. Hopefully I'm coming through clearly enough using the cell phone. But thank you all so much for being here today to learn a little bit more about how we're going to maximize this opportunity that we have that Family First has brought to us to draw down our federal funds on the prevention side. We spend so much time talking, I feel like, around how we are going to implement the other part of this Family First Prevention Services Act around placement of our young people. And what's very exciting about this act is really the opportunity to do more work on the prevention side and draw down the dollars that allow us to scale the programs that we want to implement here in Colorado so that we can serve even more families across the state, no matter where they are, with these evidence-based practices and programs that we know will help us keep kids and families together safely. So we were talking a little bit here just a moment ago about taking a pause and recognizing how far we have really come in this journey to implement Family First. So really big, huge kudos to so many people who've been working from the very beginning with the advisory committee, our implementation team, everybody who's participated in any one of our subcommittees that has helped to get us to the place that we are today, really to focus on how are we going to maximize this opportunity to draw down our federal funds on the prevention side by implementing these practices. How are we going to successfully collect data? How are we going to ensure fidelity to the program designs and the models that we want to be able to implement and really do that monitoring? How will we implement the trauma-informed care requirements with our providers and with our community members who are going to be providing these services? We have such a strong foundation here, but from implementing all of the programs around the waiver, we have a strong belief in implementing evidence-based practices, while we still recognize that not everything that counts can be counted, and that there are times in which we want to be able to offer programs to families that may suit their needs best. But having an array of evidence-based practices here in Colorado that we can scale up again so that everybody can use them will allow us to continue to maximize that opportunity to draw down 4E and continue to scale and use our dollars in really wise ways where we're able to blend and braid those resources together so that we can sort of rise all of the boats, right? So we're all going to go in on this and together really selflessly as counties, as a state, as community-based providers, all of us coming together in service of kids and families. And I think if we all sort of go into it with that greater good and understanding where we're trying to get in the long run, that some of these things that are more technical along the way that we'll have to work through as we have been working through for the last couple of years will eventually come forward. So thank you all again for being here today. I'm excited that we're having these conversations about how will we actually start to draw down these resources and how will we be able to use them. So I will hand it over to Lexi so that she can say a few words as well.
Thank you, Minna. I'm Lexi Kuznick. I'm the director of CHSDA, which is the Colorado Human Services Directors Association. As the name indicates, we represent all the directors from all 64 counties throughout the state of Colorado, and we really appreciated so much the partnership with not only CDHS but the provider community around the state and so many others. As an association and county departments, we have really expanded our lens of the role of human services in the lives of families and focused increasingly on upstream, true primary prevention as much as possible. And so much of the vision that we've been moving towards the last few years aligns with Family First. And so I see this as an opportunity, the claiming of $40 in prevention as sort of a way to supplement the work that we're already moving and striving towards. And so some of the things I'm excited about are the ways in which, while we know that the individual counties or the individual providers might not see the federal reimbursements, what we hope you all will see are greater investments into your programs in so many other ways: increased referrals, increased alignment and partnership, and then increased expansion and capacity building throughout the state. One of the things that I'm excited about in the trust fund and in the bill that we all worked on together is that the use of these dollars needs to be aligned with the strategic vision and planning that we're doing more broadly around Family First. And the reason why I'm excited about that is, for me, that means we need to be using data and gaps analysis and other information, and I'm going to sneeze, excuse me, to identify where the services are lacking and then to really strategically invest in those. Our goal is for children and families to be able to access the services they need, regardless of where they live, regardless of the funding source or the county that they're based in. So I'm excited about these opportunities. I really think this has to be we're all moving in the same direction. And I appreciate the partnerships. And the last thing I'll just plug for the counties on the call is that Heather Durasco, who you all know, who's been our county leader and visionary on Family First, has worked really well closely with CDHS to put together a toolkit specifically for counties on the implementation of Family First. And so if you don't already know that and haven't looked at it, please do. Feel free to reach out to me directly or Heather, and we'll get it to you. And we think that it can be modified and in order to be applicable to so many other partners who are on this call as well. So I'll leave it there and turn it back over to you, Angelina. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. I think that's going to be some really great level setting for us as we continue to have these conversations throughout the month of August. So thank you again, Minna and Lexi, for joining us and giving us a good starting place. Okay, I'm going to jump in. So again, maybe I should have had this up. Here are our presenters for today in order of appearance, because I felt like that was the easiest way. So I'm just going to jump in, and then as folks present, please introduce yourself to the group. We have a pretty big one here today. Again, put questions you may have in chat. We'll have time to open up mics and ask questions at the end. Okay, I'm Angelina Callis, Family First Project Manager for those folks who weren't on a little bit earlier. I am in the Division of Child Welfare, and I have been working for the past year and a half or so on all things related to Family First. So I thought this might be an interesting opportunity for us to all get together and talk about what claiming under Family First looks like, what it means, how Colorado is, as always, unique in our structure of claiming for Family First. So these are the things we're going to talk about. What are the basics of Family First funding, which really is a breakdown of like Title 4E and understanding how that works. We'll talk about the State Children's Trust Fund Act, understanding core funding and the trust fund, and then questions and potential resources. So I'm going to have my internal DCW folks, while I'm doing this first part, help me out. If you see things in the chat, please feel free to respond. And then once I'm not presenting anymore, I will definitely keep my eye on the chat as well. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. I think some folks just need a baseline, right? We're all coming from different spaces and different areas. Some of us may have never even heard of Title 4E before we started talking about Family First. So first off, let me start with just the baseline. Again, for my financial folks, I know this might be way oversimplified for you, but please just bear with us for a minute. I just want to get us a good sort of level standing ground for us to build upon. So Title 4E reimbursement prior to Family First was really related to the administrative costs and the provision of services for child welfare after a youth had already been removed, with a small little caveat around if you can prove that they were at imminent risk of removal from their home, you could get some administrative dollars for that. It mostly was tied to foster care maintenance payments. So how are we paying for youth to be in placement after they've already gone out of home? So with Family First, it really was a huge shift in the way child welfare is funded by the feds. So for Colorado, of course, there had been all of these other ways that we were providing prevention services prior to Family First, but for a lot of other states and really the nation and the feds as a whole, Family First is the first opportunity where the feds are really committed to saying we want to put funding and dollars towards the prevention of involvement in child welfare or the prevention of out-of-home placement. So what Family First does is it allows us to get a certain percentage of reimbursement for prevention services for families who are youth and families who meet the definition of candidacy. And so I want to put in the chat, I will try and do this while I'm talking with you all. We'll see if I can like triple task here. Colorado has their own definition of candidacy that has been in our prevention plan, and I'm putting links and that definition in the chat right now. But so this helps us define who may be a candidate for Family First prevention dollars, okay? So I just want to talk a little bit about traditional 4E candidacy and Family First 4E candidacy as soon as I get the remainder of this in the chat. Okay, so under traditional 4E, which is what I'm going to call it so we can see that there's a difference and we can have some shared language around this. So for traditional 4E, which is everything before Family First, that mostly will remain, right? Candidacy was that imminent risk, right? We have to show and prove that a youth and family or a youth is at imminent risk of out-of-home placement, and there were all these requirements. We still had to, any youth or family in that situation had to meet all of the same eligibility requirements under traditional 4E, which I know the biggest one that folks I'm sure have heard of or talk about a lot is the income restriction, which is based off of the 1996 AFDC guidelines, which eventually turned into TANF, but have never been updated since then. So it can be really difficult for families to meet that eligibility. And so that's traditional 4E. So you had to be a candidate and you also had to meet those income restrictions and the rest of the traditional 4E eligibility. Now, with the shift to Family First, the only eligibility that youth and families are required to meet is Colorado's definition of candidacy. So that's why I put it in the chat. It's a really big deal to say that in order to get 4E funding, families and youth will no longer have to meet those other restrictions, especially the income one. And it's a huge deal that Colorado gets to define candidacy for ourselves. So there was lots of group work around this. If folks have heard of the implementation team, they were big in defining candidacy and creating this definition for us with a lot of different stakeholders. That could be a whole session in and of itself, so I'm not going to dig too deep into it. But that's essentially the super high level version of what the difference is between traditional 4E and Family First 4E. So I know that folks have been hearing or saying things like, once October 1st comes around and Family First is in effect in Colorado, we can start drawing down funds for service. So again, I want to be clear, right? There are some restrictions around the prevention services that we can claim for. There's restrictions, obviously, right, around eligibility. So what needs to happen in order for someone to claim for a prevention service under Family First? The service itself will have to be on Colorado's prevention plan. More often than not, it will have had to also be reviewed by the federal clearinghouse to at least have some sort of rating. And I will put the link to that clearinghouse in the chat also. I'm sure most of our prevention providers know that clearinghouse and are probably watching all of the things going on with it. But for the rest of our folks, I'll put it in the chat so you can see. So service has to be on the Colorado prevention plan. it more than likely has to be rated by the clearinghouse in some way. And the youth and the family also have to meet the definition of candidacy. So those are the three things. They seem kind of small because I'm not digging into each and every one of them. But please know, like, behind each of those things, there are a multitude of steps, right? It takes a lot for a program to be approved under the clearinghouse and get some sort of rating. There's all kinds of federal requirements that the state of Colorado has to follow in terms of how many well-supported, promising, supported programs we can have in our plan. There's a whole like ranking list and things like that, and we have to have a certain percentage of one kind and not the other. So there's lots of background that goes into all of those things, but in general, very broadly, those are the three things that have to happen in order for us to be able to claim for a service. During session 3, we'll talk a lot more about what on the service provision side of things is required, which would be things like, does the youth have a prevention plan? What's the start date, right? What services are they receiving? Are they receiving an approved service on Colorado's plan? So we're going to dig more into those in later sessions, but I wanted to do the super broad overview. So again, this last set of bullets around Family First reimbursement. For folks who are in the financial world, you know what the 4E penetration rate means and is. I just want to say for those of us that are not, essentially it's a very, I call it a very complicated equation, which tells us based on how many youth in traditional 4E meet the eligibility requirements times all of these terrible calculations means that's how much we can claim for 4E. Again, Family First does not have to go through the penetration rate, but they do have to meet those other requirements. Oh, good, I put a link. So when you get access to the documents, this link right here, so this is the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families, their public instruction that came out in 2018. You can open that up if you want to learn more and see specifics around what their recommendations were in terms of prevention services implementation, and you could read more closely through those requirements. And then I already talked about prevention services under Family First, the clearinghouse, what's required on Colorado's plan, and you can see that the link that I put in the chat under the definition of candidacy will take you to the draft plan that we currently have. So that was lots of very fast talking. I do see that there's questions in the chat, so I will get to those. But for right now, I'd like to turn it over to Molly, who I know I saw on, so I believe she's here.
Hi, good morning. Oh, no, it's afternoon. Good afternoon. All right. So I am going to talk a little bit about the Children's Trust Fund in partnership with Erin Miller. Angelina, if you're able to go to the next slide, I think we have a couple of pieces here. Great. So for those of you I don't know, my name is Molly Bradley, and I'm the Deputy Director of our Office of Children, Youth, and Families, and wanted to talk a little bit about what Lexi referenced up front, which is the Colorado Children's Trust Fund. This is a great, great opportunity to think about how we really expand prevention services statewide, recognizing that as you're listening to Angelina, some of our smaller communities may be thinking, I don't have these prevention services in my community, or how do we build this in a way that is sustainable, recognizing that there are limited resources right now. So one thing that I want to talk a little bit about is one of our strategies to really compile and grow these funds over time. So as Angelina mentioned at the top, Colorado really expects to begin starting to draw down federal funds for the first quarter of the federal fiscal year starting October. And in the first year, we are expecting somewhere between $2 and $6 million of additional 4E drawdown specifically for prevention, depending on some of the federal approvals that are pending for some of the eligible programs. The sources of our federal funding and the claiming that we will be doing really comes from expenditures made by the Office of Early Childhood, its contracted entities, and then also county departments of human and social services through their local funds and through the Child Welfare Service and Core Services blocks. So for several months, earlier this year, the Department of Human Services worked with a variety of different stakeholders, including county departments of Human and Social Services, to think about how we might create a mechanism to actually pool our new 4E drawdown for the purposes of strategic capacity building across the state. That was done with a particular eye towards statewide population needs, recognizing that if you don't have services in your community, you don't immediately have a source of prevention drawdown. So we want to think about how to set up a mechanism really that will support build out of those prevention services in our communities where we do see those gaps in services, and how to do it in a way that really is sustainable and allows us to continue to grow our 4E prevention drawdown over time. So this past legislative session, the department then in tandem with many of our county stakeholders, including CHSDA and OEC, and a few of our early childhood partners as well, proposed an amendment to House Bill 21-1248, which is a Colorado Children's Trust Fund bill, to actually use the existing trust fund for this purpose. There was a lot of debate kind of back and forth earlier in the year about whether or not we wanted to create a new fund to pool 4E prevention dollars or really use something in existence. And Colorado Children's Trust Fund presented an excellent opportunity to actually pool those funds into an existing account that was created for the purposes of really supporting primary and secondary prevention. So the bill allows us essentially to distribute the new 4E drawdown in a way that will sustainably expand the availability of prevention activities aligned with Family First, increasing access of Coloradans to those critical services, and then in turn, increasing our future 4E drawdown into the state for prevention. So that portion of the trust fund bill really did 4 different things. The first thing that it did was establish a new and stable annual source of revenue for the trust fund by directing that all 4E prevention revenue resulting from state expenditures on prevention services under Family First be deposited into the trust fund. The second thing that it did was actually direct the trust fund to claim future federal reimbursement for any eligible grantees or expenditures made by grantees of the fund, to make sure that we are also drawing down 4E for any of those eligible investments and depositing that into the fund also so it grows over time. The third thing that it did was ensure growth of the fund's revenue by ensuring that federal 4E deposited into the fund is used to expand specifically federally reimbursable programs on the clearinghouse or under evaluation for inclusion in that Family First Prevention Services clearinghouse. That is not a restriction on other sources of funding for the trust fund, but any Title 4E prevention drawdown we did put in law as being used specifically in line with Colorado's Prevention Services Plan for the purposes of ensuring that we're using funds for those activities that will draw down future 4E and going forward, and being able to use that to continually build capacity and expand availability of services statewide. Finally, the last piece of this amendment was that a significant portion of the new revenue into the fund clearly would result from a lot of county child welfare block expenditures. So in recognition that that is a place where we earn a lot of 4E, we actually increased county representation on the board, restructured the trust fund board to make sure that there are 4 county representatives who would be able to contribute to decision-making about what we do with the 4E drawdown that gets deposited into the trust fund. So what does this all mean? Essentially, typically what we see as new federal funding is by default typically drawn down into the line item where the expenditures occur. So with this new mechanism, all claimed 4E for direct service expenditures will be deposited into the trust fund after being claimed from the federal government centrally through CDHS. So that includes all eligible 4E prevention drawdown originating from our Office of Early Childhood line items that fund programs like Safe Care, and the child welfare block, for example, for any non-Medicaid multisystemic therapy expenditures. What this doesn't do is divert from the block any existing 4E claimed traditionally for placements, and it also doesn't divert any prevention admin drawdown. So it really is just going to be claiming any new prevention $40 for direct services and sending that into the trust fund. Any admin dollars for prevention will continue to be earned into the block and go back into the allocation as it was originally. And that's how kind of we've written the bill. So that is a lot of information up front. I'm going to actually pass it over to Erin for a little bit to talk about now how we envision the board actually functioning in terms of decision making. And then we'll take any questions. So Erin, over to you.
Thanks, Molly. So my name is Erin Miller. I am the Family Strengthening Director out of the Office of Early Childhood. And so just to share some additional information after Molly about the board and how we see them utilizing and spending the money and how individuals or organizations and counties can tap into that funding. So the legislation that was passed actually expanded the board from 9 to 17 members. So we are currently in the process. We've notified all of the appointing authorities that have the authority to appoint somebody to the board. They have all been notified. They've all been given information about the board and the board's responsibilities. We are trying to get the board fully seated by September, potentially October at the latest, but we are filling the board currently. So the board makeup was changed. To Molly's point, we did add 4 board members that are county representatives. And one of the requirements, one of those requirements of being appointed to the board is that they also had to have some knowledge and some background in child welfare. But again, we are appointing the board. We hope to have them onboarded and trained by September or October at the latest, and then we will get to work. The board has two responsibilities when giving out funding. There's 2 sources of funding that will be coming into the board. First, as Molly mentioned, is the Title IV-E. That funding will be used to fund programs that are in the Colorado Family First Prevention Service Plan and that align with the funding streams or funding availability through our federal partners. The other source of funding that they have is the board currently receives $15 out of every divorce docket fee, and we get that annually, and it goes into a fund. So those 2 funds will remain separate. So for the Title IV-E claiming, again, we will follow the guidelines in our prevention plan, but we wanted to share that the board will not be making decisions in isolation. So they will be relying on the support and the information that they have available to them, and we will also be engaging others who are vested in and find the prevention work important in their world. So we contracted with the Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab some time ago to look at programs that are funded in the clearinghouse and to provide some information around what would be good opportunities for Colorado. So we will be using that as a reference. We will also be working closely with the Child Welfare Prevention Task Group as some of the work groups from the implementation team of Family First migrated or moved to a new home. The Service Prevention Continuum work group went into the Child Welfare Prevention Task Group, and so we will be looking to them for some guidance on some information they have or what they have learned and any recommendations they have that they would like the board to consider for funding. We also will utilize the Family First Clearinghouse, where they would list all the eligible services and their rating. And then again, we do have a nice mixture of individuals that are on the board. The board was expanded, which included some additions, like we added HICPUF, we added Department of Labor Affairs, we added somebody from Office of Children, Youth, and Family from Child Welfare, and then it added three community members to be participants on the board, one with lived experience in having received prevention services or child welfare services. So we will have a nice, diverse board, and we'll have lots of information and opportunities to draw from on how we will utilize the spending that we will draw into the fund. So the funding that will go out through the board, it will follow the same process that CDHS uses. It will, once the board makes a determination on what programs it's going to fund, a solicitation will be created. It will go out through our CDHS procurement process, utilizing the vendor support services system, and then it will go through the scoring process, review, evaluation, and award process as any other solicitation offered, or as many of the solicitations offered through Colorado Department of Human Services. In the solicitation, it will include information around how much funding is available for that solicitation. It will provide information about what is going to be funded or what applicants can apply to have provided in their community. And then it will also provide information around the length of the contract terms, anywhere from 1 year and then 1 year with 4 option years with a maximum of 5. So if you don't have information or you need information on how to access the VSS system, I would say contact, if you have a contact within Office of Early Childhood, you have programming there, we'd be happy to help you. And I would assume the same would be true for OCYF Angelina, but I'm not sure. But if you need information on VSSS, we'd be happy to help you and point you in the right direction, as that's where all of the solicitations will come out of. And as soon as we get a large enough pool of money that we can start doing solicitations and putting those out the door, we will do it as quickly as we possibly can. So that's just some information on how the process will go for awarding and soliciting applications, and just a little bit more about our makeup. And then the other thing that I would add about that is thinking about the other revenue source from the divorce docket fees. The board will have the discretion to fund priorities that they see that are either primary or secondary prevention. Historically, we have funded child sex abuse prevention, and we have funded substance use during pregnancy prevention programs. So the board may make a decision otherwise to fund other primary and secondary preventions, but that's our focus at the moment. So that will remain a separate pool of funding outside of Title IV-E. So with that, Angelina, I guess I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Erin. And then I'm actually going to move on to the next slide. Molly is going to help us talk through what this means, core and the trust fund. And I'm sure, Erin, we might be pulling you back in for this conversation, of course, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sarah correctly predicted this topic in the chat. What about core? Well, so there's a couple of key differences between core and how the trust fund will operate. Many of you know that the core services block is around $57 million. It's pretty flexible, and core is really in existence to be used for child welfare prevention activities. That said, the prevention activities and things that core typically funds right now is more on the secondary prevention or tertiary prevention side, services to be able to reunify families, some services to be able to prevent further system penetration and involvement or out-of-home placement, whereas the Children's Trust Fund will really operate more in the primary secondary sphere. So that said, there are absolutely overlaps here. Things like multi-systemic therapy or family functional therapy, which are thought of really in that maybe secondary prevention space, could be funded by both. So multi-systemic therapy and family functional therapy are really the only two services right now on the federal clearinghouse that are funded actively through core. Core can be used for additional services, but that's really, it comprises a pretty small amount of the core services block right now. And so not an enormous opportunity for claiming. That said, any prevention service expenditures that come from the core services block, similar to the child welfare services block, if we can draw down for prevention for those expenditures, that too will be deposited into the trust fund. The overall impact to the core services line item, however, is pretty minimal in that any existing 4E in that line item is still going to continue to exist. We don't actually draw down much 4E right now into core services. It's about $3 million out of that $57 million, and that is all related to staffing expenditures that we capture through what's called our random moment sampling system. So all in all, the size of the core services block should not change. It won't be affected. The only thing that will change is if counties choose to use the core services block for Family First eligible prevention services, any added 4E drawdown for prevention that we will be earning on those services in the future would, instead of going into core services, simply go into the trust fund to be pooled for that strategic capacity building. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Angelina and see if we want to take any questions.
Yes. So I'm going to right now put this link that Heather Drosko put in the chat, which is the Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab report. I'm going to make sure that that's in the PowerPoint slides so folks have access to that as well. Okay, so before I jump into resources and what's sort of at the end of the slide deck, let's see if there's questions. I know Anita, so in the chat, can Medicaid eligible families use Medicaid to utilize MST? Does CORE or 4E kick in for those families who are not Medicaid eligible? And then Molly was already typing the answer.
Whoops, sorry.
No, you're good.
The answer is yes. Medicaid, first of all, should always be the first payer. So if you have a Medicaid eligible family, Medicaid should be used to pay for those Medicaid eligible family first services that are on the clearinghouse. In some cases, we have families receiving those services who are not Medicaid eligible. So if there's not an opportunity to claim Medicaid, then core services or other funds through the child welfare block or even through the Colorado Children's Trust Fund now could be used to pay for those services.
Thank you, Molly. Okay, any other questions? I know we covered a lot of information, I feel like, some of which might be new to folks, some of which may not be new, but you maybe just wanted an opportunity to get some clarifying responses here. So Mimi, is there a plan to be sure Medicaid does pay for those services and not deny those payments, which forces us to use CORE? So I'm trying to think, maybe Yumiko can help me out on this. I know, Yumiko, are you on? There's been lots of coordination between OCYF and CDHS and HCPF, which is the Medicaid agency in Colorado, right? And so I think as part of that coordination, there is lots of conversations happening around, I know, like the coordination of services, who's paying for what, right? How we can make sure that it has this terrible name, it's just like the payer of last resort. And that's in the Family First and the Title 4E language. So there's lots of work groups that are happening around that already, talking about how we can coordinate to provide for services in that way. And Yumiko, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, I actually haven't been part of those conversations, and if anyone else knows, please put in the chat or speak up. I believe that's the conversation that's happening with a couple subgroups as part of the Delivery of Child Welfare Services Task Force. There's a Medicaid subgroup and a federal drawdown maximization group, and I believe that's where those conversations are happening.
Okay, thank you. So I hope that kind of answers your question, Mimi, which is essentially like we're still working on coordinating with HCPF to make sure we're supporting this across the state. So Jill, how often will Colorado review or revise the Family First statewide prevention plan? So I'm going to have Megan Lanefield help us out in responding to that question. I believe she was available. If I'm not remembering correctly, then Matt Holtman, I'm going to call on you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Megan Langfield, and I serve as the Core and Prevention Services Administrator within Division of Child Welfare. We are currently working under the Child Welfare Prevention Task Group on a number of subcommittees. Currently, we have 2 of those. A third will be coming on board in coming weeks. One of those work groups is our Programs and Services work group that will be looking to analyze services as well as creating a process to ensure that we're thoroughly assessing the needs of each community within Colorado, so that as we move forward within Family First and prevention at large within child welfare, we're being mindful and strategic around the services and supports that may be needed across the state in order to serve the families and communities across our entire state.
Thank you, Megan. So it's a little, I didn't get much background in this, so I apologize, but essentially Colorado state plan can be updated whenever we want. But Megan's group is really going to help us figure out like what makes sense in terms of a schedule, right? Because a lot of work goes into adding a prevention service to the plan. And so we can't just randomly say, oh yeah, this service, great, put it on the plan, resubmit to the feds, because then the feds also have to review, right? So we all know how that goes. Like that takes its own set of time as well. And that kind of leads into the next question here from Martha around, have the feds approved our candidacy definition and our prevention plan? If not, when do we think we will hear if it's approved or not? So we did the draft plan that I put a link to in the chat, was submitted last August. We did receive feedback from the feds. And Yumiko, I'm going to have you help me out if you want to add to anything I'm saying. They were very excited and happy about Colorado's definition of candidacy. And they also said, your really exciting definition of candidacy is very broad, and your county administered state. So tell us how you plan to implement every single service on your plan with a broad definition of candidacy, and so that all 64 counties can do it potentially if they want to, and how you're going to maintain all of the requirements under Family First. So it's been a lot of time on the CDHS side, gathering information from service providers, trying to plan and design what it looks like so that we have a fully essentially designed layout for the feds to resubmit and hopefully get approval. So that's where we're at right now. Technically, it has not been approved by the feds, but the feedback that we have received was very positive and they are happy. They just want a whole bunch more information. And Yumiko, like I said, I don't know if you want to add anything. No? Okay. All right, so Joni, if a service provider in our community uses, for example, brief strategic family therapy, and they are not a Medicaid provider, how does the drawdown work for the county? So Molly, I might have you help me with this one.
Yeah, so if I'm following this question right, so brief strategic family therapy, essentially if the provider is not a Medicaid provider and the family is not Medicaid eligible, we would use any other source of fund and simply draw down the 4E for that purpose. I think if we get into, if you're saying that it's not a Medicaid provider, but the family is Medicaid eligible, then I think we would likely want to touch base with HCBUF just to work through that specific scenario. In general, though, if Medicaid isn't covering our service, we absolutely can use other sources of funding to cover that service, and the drawdown would work the same. We would essentially just claim any expenditures that were used by county-only funds or state general fund. We would claim that centrally, and then the drawdown would be deposited into the trust fund.
Thank you, Molly. And I just want to put a plug in for next week's session. Heather Dorosco from CHSDA is going to be helping us lead a panel discussion on the braiding and blending of funding. So that might be a great one to attend when we're talking about what does or does not Medicaid cover, how can we use core funds, are there other funds that we can use to support families across the state. Okay, Joe, I see your question about trails. And there is currently a prevention plan in trails. So this is pretty specific for our county staff, our county child welfare staff, and using trails. So for other folks who don't know, trails is the essentially the data system that child welfare utilizes to case manage and track all of our data and information. So there is already a prevention plan in trails, Joe. It's the treatment/prevention plan. We should get together individually, I think, with Lucinda or Megan and Matt Holtman to figure out exactly how you should be entering those cases into trails. I will just give a heads up to our county folks. John Steinmetz and myself and some folks from the trails team have been working as quickly as we can to create a tip sheet for you on how you will enter prevention plans into trails when we're ready to start doing that. So it's up and coming. We're working on it, trying to get the best resources possible. So like screenshots and things like that. So it really is a nice visual guide for workers on how they should be entering that information. So actually, speaking of that, John, can you copy that comment from the chat and make sure that you put it in our building of that? What we're trying to do is create some case scenarios so that we can actually walk workers through real cases in which they would need to put in a prevention plan.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, Emily, how can counties petition to have a treatment modality reviewed by the clearinghouse? As an example, we offer DBT, but you don't see it on the list.
I can take that one, Angelina. I think for the immediate short term, I'm going to put my email in the chat and I'd be happy to talk it through with you. Moving forward, that's going to be a process that's managed by the Prevention Services Task Group that Megan was speaking to earlier today, in terms of what services does Colorado want to proactively put forward or add to our prevention plan. As you can hear from all the discussion so far, just ensuring that the relatively small set of services that we're beginning with, that we're meeting all the requirements and our plan is approved, that's a heavy lift in and of itself. However, we are very interested in knowing what other services are out there that we think could potentially meet some of the federal requirements around evidence and that are important to our continuum in Colorado. So would love to hear more about that service. So what states can do if the clearinghouse has not yet reviewed a service, but a state like Colorado feels like it would be a good fit for Family First and it meets various evidence requirements, we can invest the resources into doing an independent review of the research, submit that to the feds, and hopefully get transitional payment until the clearinghouse has time to officially review that. And we have done that for a few services already in Colorado. So we do have a mechanism to do our own reviews and try to get drawdown while we're waiting for the clearinghouse to do an official review. But like I said, shoot me an email for the time being and we can discuss further and if it would be, the service would be a good candidate and where to go from here. And then, you know, moving forward, that's going to be part of the prevention task group's work.
Thank you, Yumiko. I'm happy you jumped in because I was going to call on you anyway. Okay, so Emily, that's the one we just answered. Claudia, who monitors for fidelity of the service to get funding to draw down? That is a super great question. I'm probably going to go back to Yumiko to help me out with that. There's lots of conversations that we've been having around that, and again, part of the federal feedback, and their question was the same one, right? How are we going to do this with a broad definition of candidacy in a county administered system? Over to you.
Yeah, it's a big question. And as you can imagine, that's a big challenge too, to ensure that we have a consistent statewide process for monitoring fidelity and engaging in continuous quality improvement, which are requirements in Family First. And Angelina, isn't this on the agenda? I don't remember if it's the third or fourth.
The third session is where we'll review all of the federal requirements and we'll speak to sort of what Colorado has been doing to address our support providers in each of those.
Yeah. And so just briefly, because this is something we're still figuring out, what it's looking like is for each individual service, there is hopefully and usually a specific fidelity monitoring tool. Or actual metrics that you use to monitor fidelity of implementation of that service. And so what we're looking at across the board is for some services, there are already processes and infrastructure in place to monitor fidelity. And it's more a question of what is the state's role in looking at that information and responding where needed. And then there's some other services, for example, trauma-focused CBT, where that infrastructure does not exist yet. And so we're working closely with some of our research partners to figure out how can we as the state build the infrastructure to gather and monitor that data. What is the state's role truly in monitoring fidelity, et cetera. So that's a big area I agree that we are looking at. For now, again, we see this as a state level responsibility to really look and monitor that data and that information. But I think there's an important role for counties in terms of understanding the performance and the fidelity of your providers that you're contracting with. And so I think as we continue to build out this statewide system, it'll be really important to continue talking about what types of data and information do counties want to see, and be part of that conversation of understanding the quality and the level of fidelity that your providers are meeting in some of the services. So we'll get into a little more in a future session about fidelity monitoring, and know that that's definitely a big area that we are looking at and trying to build out a system at the state level for.
Thank you, Yumiko. Okay, so there's just actually a couple more questions. I don't want to keep folks over. I know it's sort of like ending at a weird time, 12:55, but I wanted to give people a little bit of time between this and I'm sure your 1 o'clock meetings that we all have. So I just want to say quickly, and Matt helped me address some of these in the questions are in the chat. So around these PA3 cases and trails, sort of anything related to that, we're working with Mod Squad. So again, for our county child welfare folks, right, the data system and the trail support team to talk more about that and figure out the details and the design and what that looks like. So more information is upcoming. Josie, will there be any guidance about whether counties utilize core funding or 4E funding for eligible services? And if so, what will be the determining factors? We only have 3 more minutes, so I'm not going to answer that question fully, but I'm going to highly encourage you to come to next week's session where we're talking about braiding and blending of funding. I think you can get some really good information there. For the remainder of the questions, and Josie, for your full response, I will follow up with a couple folks in the email that I sent to all who registered with some remaining answers for you. And before we all pop off, I just want to highlight, when you get a copy of the slide deck or when you access it through the Google link, again, if you can't get through Google, please let me know. I will get it figured out so you can get those. There are lots of links in the last 2 slides over here. So underneath resources at the end of the presentation, there's 2 slides with links to a lot of the information that we've been covering today and just some general family first stuff that might be helpful. So I just wanted to make sure that folks see that. I tend to use a lot of links in my PowerPoint so you can access things later. Okay, 2 minutes. I am not gonna make us stay online for 2 minutes. I appreciate all of you attending and coming, asking questions, being engaged. I hope I see a lot more of you or repeats next week and in the rest of the sessions for August. And of course, a big, big thank you to all of my presenters and folks who helped me respond to questions. I appreciate you.